Welcome to the deep dive. Just imagine for a second trying to keep up with the sheer, just the unbelievable amount of news from a single day. We're zeroing in on July 2025, a day where, well, Europe is baking under this intense heat wave, dealing with massive wildfires. And at the same time, you've got the U.S. Supreme Court rejecting a huge appeal from ExxonMobil and astronomers finding a brand new interstellar object just zipping through our solar system. It's a lot. So our mission today isn't just, glancing at headlines. We've got this incredible stack of sources, articles, research, our notes for this deep dive, and we're going to really pull out the most important bits of knowledge and insight for you. Think of it as your shortcut to being genuinely informed with some surprising details and hopefully enough context to really grasp what's going on globally.
It really is striking how these things that seem totally separate, climate crises, court rulings, space discoveries, political fights, how they're often linked. Understanding them individually is one thing, but seeing the connections, that helps you understand the why. It lets you connect the dots and see the bigger global trends much more clearly.
Okay, let's dig into that. Starting with the environment, specifically that heat wave and the wildfires in Europe. A really visceral impact of climate change. We're talking early July 2025, temperatures soaring into the 40s Celsius, Paris, Rome, Berlin, really baking. And the human cost, it was immediate and tragic. Spanish police confirmed, at least 8 heat-related deaths?
Yes, including those 2 men caught in that wildfire in Catalonia and a child in southern Spain. Just awful.
Beyond that immediate tragedy, Italy's agricultural sector was sounding alarms too, warning about major crop damage.
And what's really telling, I think, is how quickly this crisis showed the deeper vulnerabilities. Healthcare systems totally strained, hospital admissions surging. It also threw the political side into sharp relief. You had some far-right parties kind of jumping on the demand for air conditioning to critique green policies.
Right.
While at the same time, environmentalists were slamming the, frankly, slow pace of climate action. It really forces that question, doesn't it? How do you balance immediate needs with those necessary long-term changes?
Definitely.
Though it is interesting to see some innovation bubbling up, like those AI-developed cooling paints getting attention. Adaptation is becoming just as critical as mitigation.
Yeah.
But the science is clear. This is the new normal, unfortunately.
And speaking of wildfires, that connects directly to what was happening in Crete, Greece. Mass evacuations there, too. On July 2nd, right? A fast-moving fire pushed by these gale-force winds forced over, 1,500 people out of hotels and homes?
That's right. It burned through the night, threatening Petra, that key port town. And putting it in context, these kinds of extreme events, they're sadly becoming almost an annual occurrence across southern Europe. It's fueled by the rising heat, the droughts, those strong winds. The key takeaway isn't just the damage itself, but the urgent calls you hear now for more strategic investment, better firefighting coordination, better forest management. It really shows how global climate shifts hit hard at the local level.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we see these immediate impacts, there's also the question of accountability, especially for corporations contributing to environmental pressures, which brings us to that U.S. Supreme Court decision you mentioned, rejecting ExxonMobil's appeal over that big air pollution fine in Texas. They upheld a $14 million fine, right, for Clean Air Act violations at the Baytown plant, a case that started way back in 2010.
Yes, brought by Environment Texas and the Sierra Club. And beyond just being a win for public health advocates, this ruling, it might signal the courts are more willing now to look at patterns of non-compliance by companies, not just one-off incidents.
Interesting point.
It could potentially empower more citizen lawsuits aiming for systemic change, not just fines, challenging that old idea that these penalties are just, the cost of doing business for big polluters. It shows these actions have real legal teeth.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still on environment and industry, Europe's big push for electric vehicles. It seems to be hitting some pushback from car makers. On July 2nd, major manufacturers were apparently urging Canada's climate envoy, Mark Carney, to rethink Europe's EV sales targets.
Yeah, arguing the goals are maybe too aggressive, unrealistic, given the current market, supply chain issues, that sort of thing. It really highlights that classic tension in green transitions, doesn't it?
Right.
The push-pull between ambitious government goals and the often slower economic and production realities of industry.
It's that policy versus practice problem.
Exactly. Environmental groups might say car makers are dragging their feet, while the industry warns that pushing too hard too fast could hurt jobs and competitiveness, maybe even slow down the transition overall. It's a tricky balance.
Definitely. Okay, let's pivot now to the U.S. political scene. It's pretty intense. There's this major legislative battle over what's being called the One Big Beautiful Bill. Controversial name, controversial contents. The Senate just passed it, and now the House is debating it. The vote in the Senate was incredibly close, wasn't it?
Yeah, 51-50. Vice President J.D. Vance had to cast the tie-breaking vote on July 2nd after this marathon 27-hour session debating amendments. Grueling stuff.
And the bill itself, it includes sweeping tax cuts, framed as supply-side measures.
Right, aimed at boosting investment.
Plus more funding for fossil fuels, which kind of runs counter to green initiatives, and significant border defense spending. But the really debated part seemed to be the deep cuts to Medicaid and food assistance. Critics are saying this shifts huge burdens onto states, potentially affecting millions.
Absolutely. Republicans are framing it as keeping campaign promises, naturally. Democrats are, well, vehemently opposed.
And President Trump apparently set a July 4th deadline for the House to vote on it. Talk about pressure. Given the massive projected debt increase, something like $3.3 trillion, what's the core economic argument from the supporters? And how are critics hitting back beyond just the debt figure?
Well, supporters are really leaning into the idea that these tax cuts will unleash major economic growth, reduce the burden on businesses, high earners, that frees up capital for investment, creates jobs. They often point to past examples arguing the debt is sort of a necessary short-term price for long-term gain.
Okay.
But critics are pushing back hard, not just on the debt number itself, but on who benefits. They argue the cuts heavily favor the wealthy, while slashing the safety net will actually suppress consumer demand, increase poverty, and ultimately cancel out any broader economic gains.
So distributional effects are key to the critique.
Precisely, and is causing ripples within the GOP too, some internal disagreements. And you can definitely expect significant public backlash, especially from people directly affected by the cuts, that could really complicate things in the House.
Okay, moving on to another really contentious issue. U.S. immigration policy specifically reports about transferring migrants to Guantanamo Bay. Reports on July 2nd confirmed at least 54 migrants from places like China, Jamaica, Liberia, even the UK were detained there. That's quite a development.
It is, and it certainly evokes past controversies surrounding Guantanamo. At the same time, the administration is also suing sanctuary cities like Los Angeles, really ramping up the federal versus local fight over enforcement.
What's the reaction been like?
Strong backlash, particularly from human rights groups and local leaders. L.A. Mayor Karen Bass called the measures extreme, potentially unlawful. The deeper issue, of course, is the whole legal and moral precedent of using a place like Guantanamo for migrant detention, given its history. Public opinion is split. Some support a tougher line, but legal challenges seem almost inevitable. And it definitely impacts America's image internationally.
Right. Now, shifting to abortion rights. A huge development in Wisconsin. The state Supreme Court reinstated abortion rights there. On July 2nd, they struck down this incredibly old ban, right, from 1849. That effectively restores access in Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's a massive shift for the Midwest's legal landscape. A huge victory for reproductive rights advocates, obviously. But it's important to see this not as an endpoint, but maybe as intensifying the fight in the long run. Anti-abortion groups immediately said they'd push for constitutional amendments to ban it again.
So the battle moves to the legislature and the ballot box?
Exactly. It could influence other states with old bans still on the books, and it will almost certainly energize voters on both sides in upcoming elections.
Okay, one more legal item, this one involving media. The settlement of Trump's lawsuit against 60 Minutes over editing. Paramount Global agreed to pay $16 million on July 2nd. That covers Trump's legal fees, but crucially, they didn't admit any fault.
Right, and the company basically said they settled to avoid jeopardizing that massive $8.4 billion merger with Skydance Media, especially since key execs at 60 Minutes had already resigned over related issues.
So what are the broader worries here?
Well, it raises serious concerns about press freedom. These kinds of suits, sometimes called SLAPPs, strategic lawsuits, against public participation, they can be used to intimidate media through expensive legal fights. Even without admitting fault, a big settlement like this could make other media companies think twice, maybe opt to settle rather than fight, especially if larger business deals are at stake. It potentially chills reporting.
So potential impacts on journalistic independence.
Definitely. And you can expect continued scrutiny from regulators like the FCC, and watchdog groups will likely keep challenging the merger itself over media consolidation concerns.
Okay, let's shift our focus globally now to some real flashpoints and diplomatic moves. Starting with the Gaza crisis, which was intensifying. By July 2nd, the numbers were grim. At least 43 Palestinians reportedly killed, including people just trying to get aid amid Israeli strikes. And Al-Shifa, Gaza's biggest hospital, had to shut down its dialysis ward. Critical fuel shortages because of the blockade. Just a desperate situation.
Truly desperate.
But then, amidst all that, the surprising diplomatic news broke. President Trump claimed Israel agreed to a 60-day ceasefire. And later, Israel's foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, seemed to confirm they accepted a U.S. proposal, relayed via Steve Witkoff. Hamas said they were reviewing it.
Yes, a potentially significant, though obviously very fragile development, if it holds.
So what was the immediate international reaction to all this? And what are the deeper implications if a ceasefire actually happens?
Well, the reaction to the ongoing violence and the humanitarian situation was already one of widespread condemnation. Aid groups, human rights organizations, the UN, all calling urgently for a ceasefire, for aid corridors. If the ceasefire does materialize, the biggest implication isn't just stopping the fighting. It's potentially opening a window for more substantial aid, maybe for real diplomatic engagement.
But it sounds fragile.
Incredibly fragile. You have deep distrust on both sides, ongoing global protests reflecting those divisions. The risk of regional escalation is still very high, and Gaza's health system is on the brink of total collapse. So, sustained, serious diplomatic pressure is absolutely crucial.
Okay, moving to another incredibly volatile situation. Those U.S. military strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Operation Midnight Hammer, they called it. This happened back on June 22nd, strikes on Natanz, Fordo, Isfahan. The first direct U.S. offensive in the context of the Iran-Israel conflict, right?
That's correct, a major escalation. By July 2nd, assessments were confirming severe damage, though some Iranian officials tried to downplay it publicly.
And the reactions were predictable, I suppose. Republicans largely supportive, Democrats and some allies expressing serious concern about constitutional authority, about escalation.
And Iran retaliated, didn't they?
Yeah.
Targeting the Al Udeid base in Qatar.
Yes. So this is huge. What are the immediate ripple effects, especially concerning nuclear non-proliferation?
The most immediate and deeply worrying ripple effect was Iran's decision right after to suspend cooperation with the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog.
That's alarming.
It's incredibly alarming for diplomats and nuclear experts. It drastically reduces international oversight, and the fear is it could allow Iran to accelerate its nuclear activities, potentially shortening the path to a weapon if they chose to go that route.
So it makes a dangerous situation even more dangerous.
Exactly. It really highlights how fragile efforts to contain nuclear proliferation in the Middle East are, and it raises the stakes significantly for everyone involved, a potentially much more dangerous phase.
Wow. Okay. And related to shifting international dynamics, there's this other development regarding Ukraine. The U.S. decided to freeze shipments of air defense and precision weapons. The White House cited a reassessment of U.S. stockpiles as the reason, announced on July 2nd.
Yeah, and predictably, this sparked intense and mixed reactions. Ukrainian officials, profoundly disappointed. They warned it could embolden Russia, drag out the conflict.
But some in the U.S. supported it.
Some U.S. lawmakers argued it was necessary for American military readiness to replenish their own stocks. But others, including some allies, worried it signaled a weakening of U.S. support for Ukraine, sending a bad message about commitment.
A complex signal, definitely. Finally, on the diplomatic stage, we had India's Prime Minister Modi embarking on this major tour, an 8-day, 5-nation trip starting July 2nd, Ghana, Trinidad and Tobago, Argentina, Brazil, Namibia, plus the BRICS summit in Rio, his biggest tour in a decade, apparently.
It really is quite extensive.
What's the strategic thinking behind such an ambitious itinerary?
Well, it seems to be much more than just routine bilateral visits. It looks like a clear signal of India trying to forge a more multipolar global role, really extending its influence beyond its traditional partners. By engaging deeply across Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Modi is actively looking to strengthen trade, find new economic partners, and really cement India's leadership within that BRICS group. A pretty bold assertion of India's growing geopolitical ambitions.
Interesting. Okay, let's switch tracks to the economy and some high-profile legal cases. U.S. stock markets were hitting new highs, but amid, as you said, mixed economic signals. On July 2nd, the S&P 500 hit a record 6,227.42. NASDAQ was up too. Dow was flat, but the Russell 2000 gained.
Yeah, some notable jumps too. Tesla had strong delivery numbers. Nike and others linked to Vietnam imports got a boost from that new trade deal.
So what's actually driving this optimism when there are still broader economic worries around?
Well, the main drivers seem to be corporate earnings coming in stronger than expected, plus that optimism around trade deals opening up markets. like the Vietnam one. But analysts are definitely still cautious. You've got those underlying concerns about what the Federal Reserve might do with interest rates and all the geopolitical instability we just talked about.
So the rally might be fragile.
Its sustainability really depends on the next batch of economic data. Inflation numbers, jobs reports, and how they line up with expectations. And crucially, how that big controversial fiscal bill we discussed earlier plays out. That could definitely sway things.
Right. And on the flip side of corporate success, we saw Del Monte Foods filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That was on July 2nd as well. They cited rising costs, supply chain issues, and significantly changing consumer habits.
Yeah, that filing is basically a strategic move to try and shed debt, streamline their operations. But it's going to impact thousands of jobs, no doubt. What's really insightful, I think, is how Del Monte's situation reflects a broader trend. A lot of these older legacy food brands are struggling. They're finding it hard to compete with the growing demand for healthier, fresher, often more locally sourced options. It's forcing a real reckoning for their business models.
Makes sense. Now on to that highly publicized Sean Diddy Combs verdict. A split decision came down on July 2nd. He was found not guilty on the most serious charges, the sex trafficking ones involving 2 women, but guilty on 2 counts related to transporting someone for prostitution.
That's right. And he was denied bail again, the court mentioning a propensity for violence and lack of remorse. He remains in custody, with sentencing moved up quickly to July 8th.
It's a complex outcome. What does this verdict really say about accountability in the music industry?
Well, it certainly sparked a lot of debate, legally and publicly. Some see the acquittal on the major charges as a partial win for Combs, legally speaking. But the convictions still represent a massive public fall from grace for such a powerful figure. And the whole case has absolutely reignited crucial conversations about power imbalances, alleged abuse in the music industry,
Right.
and the importance of holding influential people accountable even when the legal complexities lead to these kinds of mixed results. It really highlights the challenges in bringing these cases forward in such a public spotlight.
Yeah, definitely complex. Lastly, in the legal sphere, the Brian Koberger case in Idaho, he pleaded guilty to the student murders. That was also July 2nd. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. Reports said he showed no emotion, offered no explanation.
The reaction from the victims' families was understandably deeply mixed. Some felt betrayed by the plea deal, wanting a trial. Others expressed relief that the ordeal was over, sparing them an agonizing trial process.
A difficult situation for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And a plea deal itself has reignited that national debate about the death penalty, about plea bargaining, especially in these incredibly high-profile emotional cases. It forces you to weigh the certainty of conviction against, the unanswered questions about motive and maybe the fuller picture of justice that a trial might have offered.
A tough calculation.
Oh.
Okay, now for something completely different and honestly, pretty amazing discoveries beyond Earth, plus some other local impacts. Get ready for this. Astronomers found a third interstellar object, 3 Eye atlases, cruising through our solar system.
Wow, another one.
Yeah, identified by the ATLS survey on July 2nd. It follows Oumuamua from 2017 and Tuai Borisov in 2019. This is, well, it's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it?
Oh.
What makes this find so profound for astronomers?
Oh, it's incredibly significant. Think about it. Another visitor from a completely different star system just passing through our cosmic backyard. Astronomers everywhere immediately scrambled, pointing every telescope they could at it to track its path, figure out its composition, its speed.
What are they hoping to learn?
Well, the early readings suggest that hyperbolic path, which confirms it's not from around here. It's like finding, a message in a bottle from another galaxy washed up on our shore. It gives us this incredibly rare chance to glimpse what other star systems are like. It could have unique chemical signatures, maybe even offer clues about how planets form light years away. It's a truly rare opportunity.
Absolutely fascinating. Okay, bringing things back down to Earth and local safety concerns there was that huge explosion at a fireworks warehouse in California. This was actually July 1st, technically. A storage facility in Esparto-Yolo County. It exploded, caught fire, destroyed the plant, damaged nearby homes. 7 people were initially reported missing.
Right, a major incident. Emergency crews responded quickly, evacuations happened, they got the fire contained eventually. But the key fallout, beyond the immediate tragedy, is the renewed focus it puts on regulations for storing fireworks and whether those rules are actually being enforced properly. Locals are understandably demanding tighter safety standards now. It really highlights those ongoing concerns about industrial safety near communities.
Yeah, a scary reminder. And just to round out our look at July 2nd, there were several other notable global events happening that day. It really shows the sheer scope of a single news cycle. For instance, in Serbia, police detained dozens of protesters, mostly university students, after breaking up street blockades. This followed weeks of demonstrations.
Yeah, around 79 detained. It drew immediate condemnation from opposition groups and human rights organizations. It really reflects the government's hardening stance on dissent, but also signals potentially prolonged instability there, as they seem to be prioritizing control over dialogue. That could have international repercussions too, maybe impacting their EU hopes.
Then, in southern China, a building under construction collapsed into a river during flash floods.
A five-story building. Authorities promised an investigation, but it raises serious questions again about construction standards and disaster preparedness, especially in areas undergoing really rapid development.
Also on July 2nd, the Dalai Lama announced plans for a framework to guide his succession.
Right, ahead of his 90th birthday. It's clearly intended to counter Chinese government efforts to control that process. So this really sets the stage for more conflict with Beijing over who gets to determine the next spiritual leader. China sees it politically, the Tibetan Buddhist community sees it spiritually, a major point of friction.
Elsewhere, an African Union military helicopter crashed in Somalia.
Yes, at Mogadishu airport. Tragically, at least 3 people were killed. It's a stark reminder of the risks peacekeepers face in volatile zones like Somalia and just how fragile the security situation remains.
And finally, a Kurdish militant group in Iraq announced plans to start disarming as part of a peace process with Turkey.
Turkish officials welcomed it, though some Kurdish leaders apparently remain skeptical. It's seen as a potentially significant, though maybe tentative, step towards de-escalating those long-running hostilities in the region. But its success really hinges on building trust and sustained political will on all sides. A fragile process.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into July to 2025, it really is incredible just thinking back over the sheer range of things we've covered from just one day. We hope this journey through the sources has given you, a unique way to cut through all the noise and get to the heart of what's actually happening around the world, maybe giving you a bit of an edge in understanding it all.
What really stands out, I think, is how interconnected everything is. These events that seem so different, an interstellar object, the immediate human cost of wildfires, complex court verdicts, they're all threads in this big dynamic tapestry of our world. And understanding those threads, seeing the links, that's what helps you move past just the headlines and really grasp the deeper systemic connections that are shaping everything. So as we close out this look at July 2, 2025, maybe the thing that strikes you most is just how quickly, how dramatically things can shift across so many different areas at once. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That being truly well-informed isn't just about knowing the facts. It's about spotting the patterns, thinking about the ripple effects across this incredibly interconnected world. So the question to leave you with is, what implications does a day packed with news like this have for the future that you are building?